by East Texas News D.C. Washington correspondent Josh Rultenberg. Josh, how are you doing, sir?
I'm good. How are you, Devin?
Doing well. A lot to go over tonight. First, let's go to the House. So they passed the annual defense authorization bill today, mostly along party lines. So why were lawmakers so divided? And what chance does this bill truly have of passing the Senate?
Yeah, I'll start with your second question first. This has no chance of passing the Senate, and I'll get to why in a second. Now, this bill, $886 billion, this is something over the course of history, 62 years in a row, has been passed with strong bipartisan support. So what happened this year makes this very unique. And up until a couple of days ago, this had strong bipartisan support in both the Democratic caucus and the Republican caucus. But it was just a couple of days ago when House Republicans changed this bill. They amended certain things, very polarizing items, such as taking money away from the Department of Defense when it comes to paying for service members that want to travel out of state to get an abortion, or any service member that wants to have gender-affirming care, and also getting rid of diversity programs. Once these things were added to this bill, that took Democrats off the board in the House. And so that's why things mostly passed along party lines today. There were a handful of Republican detractors, but nonetheless, the House moves this forward. Now, Kevin McCarthy said that the military cannot defend themselves if they're trained in woke. But it was House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries who said that extreme MAGA Republicans hijacked this bipartisan bill and has now put the nation and the nation's security at risk. Nonetheless, once you get past all of the talking, this now goes to the Senate and it's dead on arrival. But the democratically led Senate will pass its own version of this come next week. This will not move anywhere in the House. So what happens? You're going to have negotiators from the House and negotiators from the Senate come together to try to have a bipartisan, bicameral agreement that they ultimately can send to President Biden by September 30th, because that is when the fiscal year ends. The new fiscal year begins October 1st.
Now, sticking with the House here for a second, several House Republicans also penned amendments on the defense bill in reference to cutting aid to Ukraine. So why are they so opposed to sending aid to Ukraine, and is this a position that's held by the majority of House Republicans or a select few?
Yeah, so to answer your second question first, again, this is a view of the majority party, but it is a minority opinion. Very few Republicans feel this way. Now, when you're talking about cutting aid to Ukraine, you had Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who tried to cut $300 million in aid. That failed miserably. Then you had Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz, who tried to cut off all security assistance to Ukraine. That failed miserably. Marjorie Taylor Greene also tried to stop the United States symbolically from sending cluster bombs to Ukraine. That's something that the United States has already sent to Kyiv in Ukraine, and so therefore that failed miserably as well. But Marjorie Taylor Greene also said that Congress should not authorize another penny to Ukraine and that they should push President Biden to ultimately pursue peace. But President Biden and his administration have said time and time again that there is nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. And so it's up to Ukraine if they want to pursue peace, according to President Biden. Also, when you're talking about public opinion, it is on President Biden and his administration's side right now, because more than 3 in 4 Americans believe that we are properly sending the amount of aid to Ukraine, or we're not giving them enough. And as of right now, since this war began in Ukraine, the United States has sent roughly $75 billion.
You've mentioned President Biden a few times tonight. Let's take our questioning to the White House now, with the Secret Service announcing yesterday that it closed its investigation into the cocaine found at the White House. So what has been the latest reaction to the news of the closed investigation? And do you think there's any chance of Congress continuing the investigation?
Yeah, I'm going to keep up the same theme. So I would say to you, to answer the second question first, it's definitely likely that there could be a congressional investigation about this. But to go backwards, it was just yesterday that the Secret Service said in a press release that they're not going to be able to figure out who exactly brought cocaine into the White House. They're saying they don't know who did it and they don't know where it came from. Now, it's been said that it was found in a highly traveled area where there are those that are brought in for tours that check in their cell phones. It was found in one of those cubbies. But there's only a theory that's to suggest that this was someone that was on a tour that brought it in. We just don't know. But it was the House Oversight Committee yesterday that received a briefing from the director of the Secret Service. And what came out of it, what we learned from lawmakers, was that the Secret Service was only able to narrow this down to 500 or 600 people. They didn't get anything conclusive from video, nor DNA testing, nor fingerprint testing. With that said, the chair of the House Oversight Committee, James Comer, he was not happy about this, and he said either the Secret Service is lying about where this came from, that they know exactly who did this, or that they are incompetent. And so James Comer is already investigating the Biden administration when it comes to the southern border and when it comes to the president's own family. So it would not be surprising if indeed House Oversight was to investigate the Secret Service here.
Sticking with the Biden administration announcing today that it will provide student loan relief for more than 800,000 borrowers. The announcement obviously comes after the Supreme Court struck down President Biden's sweeping student loan forgiveness plan. So how can the Education Department actually legally take this action? What makes it so different than the one the Supreme Court struck down?
Yeah, so let's take a couple other steps first. So what we know is that repayments for student loans, for federal student loans, they are going to begin again in October. There was a long pause due to the pandemic. You also highlighted how the Supreme Court just a couple of weeks ago struck down President Biden's broader plan that could have affected up to 40 to 50 million Americans, forgiving up to $20,000 in debt. So, in response to those two things, the Biden administration says starting tomorrow, anyone that has a federal student loan through an income-based repayment plan that's been paying on that plan for more than 20 years, that debt can get wiped away, basically fixing an administrative error from the Department of Education. This is something that the Education Secretary has the power to do, and therefore it will not likely be challenged in court. Unlike President Biden's larger student loan forgiveness plan, this was more of an innovative idea, and the Supreme Court said that he alone, the president, did not have the power to do this. And so this is the first response from the Biden administration. We also know that later this summer they're going to have a second plan, and this will be to wipe away debt for those paying a federal student loan only after 10 years. And so this is the response. Obviously, it's a lot smaller with 800,000 borrowers than it would have been with 40 to 50 million Americans.
That makes sense, and we'll continue to keep our eyes peeled for the second phase of that plan. Now, lastly, in other legal news, federal prosecutors have reportedly questioned multiple witnesses in recent weeks about former President Trump's attempts to overturn the 2020 election. So who actually testified before the grand jury, and what does that tell you about the state of the special counsel's investigation?
So those that testified include former President Donald Trump's son-in-law and former senior advisor Jared Kushner, and also a former top Trump White House aide, Hope Hicks. Now, the reason that the grand jury investigating this case wants to hear from them is because they want to know what the former president's intent was when it comes to trying to overturn the 2020 election. They want to know if behind the scenes the former president admitted that he lost the election to Joe Biden. Now, there's others like General Mark Milley, who was and still is chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He has said that the former president admitted to him that he lost the election. You also had the former White House communications director, Alyssa Farah Griffin. She reportedly told the special counsel that the former president admitted to her that he lost the election as well. You've seen others like former Vice President Mike Pence, former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, and also former White House counsel Pat Cipollone also testify. So with all these members of the former president's inner circle testifying or speaking to the special counsel, what this suggests is that a charging decision by Jack Smith could be coming sooner rather than later. And when you put all of the indictments that the former president either is facing or could be facing, this potentially could be the biggest one, because this one, the special counsel Jack Smith, could end up charging the former president with inciting an insurrection. And that is the only thing in the U.S. Constitution that could prevent the former president from serving as president again.
Yeah, that's definitely the big one that we will continue to keep our eyes on. Josh, I want to thank you again for joining us here on East Texas Now. Hope you have a great evening. We'll talk again soon.